Hello and welcome to Friends with Deficits. I'm your host, Adam Sultan, and my next friend is Amanda Wallingsford. Amanda is a life transformation coach, a licensed psychotherapist, and author of Embody Your Worth, Essential Strategies to Live Confidently and Create Your Dream Life. She's also the CEO of Align and Embody Coaching and owner of Positive Changes Counseling Services. I'll have more information about her posted in our show notes, but for now, let's listen to my conversation with Amanda Wallingsford.
So my mom and biological dad got divorced when I was around 2, and I think we lived in Colorado at the time. I think he ended up moving maybe to New Mexico, but we did not live near him, and so my relationship with him was very distant. But I yearned for him. I missed him a ton. I don't know the timeline, but I would see him. I think we would alternate some holidays. I would go out for a couple weeks during the summer. My mom and I ended up moving to Idaho, I think after Denver. At age 6, my mom and I moved back to Denver, and within that next year came along my adoptive father, and they got married, and he really became my father. I remember my biological dad visiting Idaho once, and he brought a new girlfriend, and he said, "Girlfriend's pregnant." That I was about 5 at the time, and already by then, I formed this belief that I wasn't important to him. And as a child, thinking, well, then maybe there's something wrong with me. So why is he going to go build a family with somebody else? Mm-hmm. He and that woman moved to California, and I would go visit in the summers, and I remember a Christmas or two visiting. But over the years, the visits got less and less, and they ended up divorcing. Visits with him were horrible because of her. So they weren't even good visits. But with all that, his visits became less and less. He moved back to Albuquerque, and I wouldn't hear from him on my birthday. Wouldn't hear from him on Christmas. It was just very sporadic. But yet I had this yearning to be close to my dad. Even though I have an absolutely amazing father, bonus father. He's been my father. But there was something from a young age. I knew my biological father was deeply wounded. And so it wasn't that I was angry at him. It was this, I've got to figure out how to fix him and help him, because I know there's something more here. So I had an internalized belief, I'm not good enough. He ended up having 2 other children with that woman. And so I have a half brother and half sister. But there was also this knowledge and this intuition or insight. I don't know what you get at 6 years old or 8 or 10, but I knew he was suffering inside. And so I was actually trying to facilitate more of a relationship, and I was very much, I remember visiting him at 14, and I didn't understand it. I couldn't put it to words, but he was very depressed. Now that I look back, he was very depressed. And so I tried to be the parent or the adult in that relationship. And I saw how race intersected, because he's Hispanic. I saw how poverty intersected. And I saw how family dynamics intersected that made me curious. There is this package here that is affecting how he shows up. And that, I think, is what coincided with my desire to go into the counseling profession. Because I knew there was something more to the story, even though he couldn't tell me. And then I would observe other people, other dynamics at school, and start looking for these patterns, noticing the people that were acting out and what kind of environment they came from. And I remember one of them being, saying, "My dad shoved me down the stairs last night." And I started noticing, oh, but you're acting out. You're the one getting in trouble. And so I don't know if we're of similar age or not, but I think we're at least within, a good range that we didn't know what trauma was.
Yeah, trauma is really recent in my world. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there wasn't language for it, but I was starting to put these puzzle pieces together. And so career-wise, I wanted to learn. Personally, I wanted to understand my dad better. Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to understand my other parents that in the home that I was living in, my mom and my dad, Bob. Mm-hmm. My biological dad's name is Lee. And then I was also very aware of people hurting like peers. But then the first significant event that it's weird, I've had to go back to it in the last 6 months because it has shown up. But the first really big shifting event, other than my father being absent from my life, was that we lived next door to these 2 people. They were younger than my parents, but I babysat for their daughters. And the man in the relationship, my experience of him, and I was 14, my experience of him was he was this larger than life, happy, optimistic man. And he killed himself, shot himself. I want to be sensitive of die by suicide, but it was one day, all of a sudden, mm-hmm. He was gone because he shot himself. And it's been in conversation even with my parents recently because they've been curious, why did that impact me so much? I'm trying to understand how the world works and why people do what they do. I could not wrap my head around how was this man 2 nights ago this loving, bubbly person, and he is now dead because he shot himself. Mm-hmm. When I had already been interested in suicide, curious as to how that happens, because I think a student had done it in the school, but I could not wrap my head around this happening, and could we have done something to prevent it?
When you say you can't wrap your head around it, are you feeling distraught or anxious, or are you just curious?
Great question. I was completely devastated. I was devastated. And then I was devastated looking at his wife's face. And she recently passed, and so that's why it's also come up. She ended up being one of the best role models for me, but my role was very much to support her, because I remember, I think we went and saw her because she was at her parents' house. He didn't do it next door at their house. He did it at his parents' house, but I have never forgotten the look on her face. And the statement she made is, everybody's going to move on and I'm going to still be living this nightmare, essentially. And because I knew my dad was suffering, and because I was left by my dad, I was like, I'm never leaving this person. So it became my mantra. I will never leave people. But it became to my detriment, where I would allow shitty things mm-hmm. because I believed that love was going to heal all. And if I could just love strong enough, And so that became my identity, but at the cost of me standing up for myself. So already this formation that I'm not good enough, there must be something wrong with me, and some other factors playing into that, social factors, with peers and girls and stuff. It's like it became my mission. I'm going to save people. I never want somebody to suffer that bad. And so I'm just kind of pausing because I'm noticing my body kind of get activated. Sometimes, and I think you've probably heard this on some of the podcasts or with your guests, is sometimes we can tell a story like we're reading out of a book and it's not our book, mm-hmm. but we're just reading the book, and then sometimes like, oh, that's showing up. Okay. So yeah, I spent 14 years old, and, my way of coping was super high achiever, overachiever, involved in tons of stuff, and then I'm going to be this super loving person at all costs. But yet still never feeling good enough. Never feeling like what I did was enough. And so then in high school, the contact with my dad was less and less, and I was kind of getting upset, like, I don't understand, just pick up the phone. Go to Grandma and Grandpa's and pick up the phone. His excuse very much was, I don't have money. But I would sometimes get letters, and I could see the suffering.
You could see, like, was he explicit, or you just had a sense?
It was, there's one statement I remember in a letter that he said, it's like I take one step forward and 2 steps back all the time. Every time I take a step forward, it's 2 steps back. And so I could see this depression, but again, also not having words for depression back in, 95, 96. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn how to fix this stuff, even though I don't have words for what the problem is. And what was happening underneath was I was experiencing depression and anxiety, but we had no words for it. And so on the outside, I am looking like I'm functioning fine because I've got a 4.4 GPA or 4.2 something. I'm on student council. I'm on the dance team, all that stuff. And underneath is when depression and anxiety started.
I always find that such an interesting irony. It's not my experience of like being an awesome student to deal with my own depression and anxiety. So when I've heard that before from other guests where they're like, I was doing great, in school and academic and busy and working. That just always kind of surprises me a little bit.
Yeah. And that makes sense. And I think it's because I was around people that said the way to succeed in life and be happy is do these things. So I'm trying all the external things and inside going, why am I not happy? Why? There must be something wrong with me because I can't make this work. I should be happy because I'm top of my class, because I made the dance team, which was my dream. I should be. And inside feeling even more shame because I'm not grateful enough. Whatever it is. And I know that also comes from societal messages. Looking at a magazine in the checkout aisle, it's like 20 ways to be grateful and it's going to cure your life. But what we also didn't know, and even in these recent conversations, is we didn't know that it also started PTSD from my neighbor dying.
What do you mean started PTSD?
Yeah, that's a weird phrasing, but I remember, was it 3 weeks ago, my mom's like, what was it about Tom's death? And I said, because I can't get the image out of my head of how he died, even though I never saw the image. And that trauma is defined by a life-threatening event, whether you directly experience it or you hear of it. And did it shift your life? Did it shift your worldview?
Is all trauma defined by that? Because I always think of trauma as a more general sense of...
Yeah, technically that is. It's just not, trauma's, in a good way. Everybody's using the word trauma. But diagnostically, in our like mental health Bible, the DSM, diagnostically, it's exposed to a life-threatening event or perceived life-threatening event.
So what would you call the broader range of things that people are calling trauma that aren't?
I think threat to safety, and the systems, like there's a threat to safety. But what I like to focus on is how did it shift your view of yourself or the world? So a lot of times there's a before and after. A car crash, for example. I thought I was fine. I thought I was safe. And all of a sudden now I understand how rapid life could change. Complex childhood trauma is not that before and after consciously necessarily. In fact, they might not even remember the before of being safe and then not. But there is a threat to the human body knows that my well-being and safety, ultimately survival, is potentially at threat. And so PTSD then comes from the body being stuck in an alert system of I need to protect myself, whether it's fight, flight, or freeze. So when we look at that shifting of losing Tom, I also then went into hypervigilance. So I had the flashbacks. I had the flashbacks of Karen's face, the wife's face, of her response. Had hypervigilance of now going, oh my God, I can't trust anything. I can't trust anybody's happiness because look at, and so that's where under the surface, not only was the low self-worth creating some depression and anxiety, and even looking back and looking at our family dynamics within my household of the anxiety that was there, then that PTSD forming and the combination wasn't great. So then I get accepted into my top choice, Vanderbilt, because I chose it because of that had a health and human services degree. And I was like, that's going to be the beginning of my career path. Got a full ride from my academics and all that good stuff. So again, life should be great. And so I go and I push through. And February of my freshman year, I get a phone call. My friend happened to be visiting from Colorado. My mom calls, puts my friend on the phone, and I know that it's not good. And my first thought was, please tell me my dad got hit by a bus. Biological dad. He didn't get hit by a bus. He also shot himself. So there is, even looking back at PTSD, I can't believe it. I specialize in trauma. I've been doing trauma work since 2002. And only in the last 5 years have I gone, holy schmoly, did I have PTSD symptoms. One of them is when I look back to that semester, that second semester, freshman year, I can't really remember much of it at all. I don't even know how I got through my classes. I have no idea. So I was very dissociated that second semester. I know I did really poor in one class, and that was government. I had also done really poor in government in high school. So I think it was just like, oh, am not good at this. But the other classes, I was getting A's and all that. So again, I'm still going with this facade to myself and others that I'm high functioning and doing okay. And I keep going. But the depression's getting worse. The anxiety's getting worse.
How did you relate to this when you heard this news?
It was like, it wasn't a surprise, but I was devastated. I had started getting to a point where I was like, okay, I just need to wait till I'm 25. And I don't know why. I just had this age of 25. I'm going to be the grown adult. I'll have enough money to go visit him. We'll get to have conversations. I just need to wait it out. And so I felt really robbed of the relationship that I was looking forward to having with him. My dad, Bob, is a godsend. I mean, he was my father figure. And I miss my dad. I saw more in him than he saw in himself. But he was also just my dad. I mean, it's just, I've had people ask me to justify why I loved him. And it's like, well, I mean, I know he wasn't healthy, but I loved him. He was my dad. Bonding took place. I mean, that's what happens,
Right.
So I was devastated inside. I was angry. Really angry, and I had no idea what to do with my anger. And so then I made it my mission to understand suicide, and all my projects were on understanding suicide and teen suicide, and I'm going to suicide conferences. So I went into it like deep head in of academic, let me understand it.
So there was kind of I'm guessing like a sort of dissociation from your emotional connection with it, but an intellectual like deep dive into it.
Yeah. And that's what it didn't dawn on me until I think 3 months ago. I was like, somebody asked me a question about that time. I'm like, I don't remember. I just remember studying. And I remember consulting with professors. Tell me about this. And there were some things that I learned about him too, and the type of father he was with my half brother and half sister, where they experienced abuse. And so I went in to help me understand, how this happens. And I mean, that was my way of coping, is academically give me the intellectual information. And that worked for a little while.
Yeah. Do you know, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but why your parents divorced?
I'm trying to, he said he didn't want to be married and a dad anymore, according to my mom. They were young. I was born when they were 21. Both had their stuff and didn't know how to probably have a healthy marriage. So I don't know that there's necessarily a concrete reason other than him saying he wanted to leave. But he also, when I look at the relationships he had in his life, he struggled to maintain them, and he struggled to engage in relationships. I don't know if it was because I was told or that's what he said, but I internalize it as he's leaving me. I know that there was not physical violence. I have asked that several times. My mom says, no, there wasn't physical violence, but it was very contentious. I think that's a good word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then with that, I performed. And then come my fall semester of my junior year, I plummeted. The pot overflowed. Like, I could not do it anymore. And I nosedived so fast into a horrible depression and anxiety.
Was there any kind of triggering event?
Yes, there was, but I don't know. I don't know if it's the triggering event or just timing. My mom and dad, Bob, my mom had come to Nashville and said that they were separating. They were taking a break. And I remember being upset about it, but not necessarily devastated. It was just like, you guys need a break. Probably had that thought. I know it bothered me, but I know timing that happened. So I don't know if unconsciously that kind of unleashed it. But I also just think my body couldn't keep up anymore. Like, it couldn't keep up with the anxiety and the feelings of just, I truly believed I was a piece of shit. I was emotionally reactive with friends. They put up with a lot. So I lost, I think, 20 pounds in 3 weeks. I did not have 20 pounds to lose, but I had completely lost my appetite, was having panic attacks all the time. I started thinking about self-injury, and then I started engaging in self-injury. And I remember then it being being finals week. And I was like, I can't do this. I cannot get through finals. And I was like, no, just push through. And that's when I took 8 aspirin. That was not a suicide attempt. That was, I need a night's sleep because I wasn't sleeping. But if we look back too, I didn't have as bad of distressing images of my dad. I had them, but they weren't the same as Tom. But I think the combination definitely repeated a lot of distressing images. I remember exactly where I was at when I had my first thought, maybe I shouldn't be here, and now I understand why my dad did this. And that's what happens with depression, is it has this threshold, and it's manageable. What we don't want to happen is when it crosses that threshold and the brain is now thinking that death is an option.
Right.
And that's really just at that point a medical condition that the depression chemicals are not operating well, Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I think the combination, maybe even, I don't know, there was social stuff too, but even maybe the combination of the schoolwork was getting a lot, and I think it was just this perfect storm. Yeah, I couldn't do it anymore. I could not uphold that, what I was doing anymore.
Did you get through finals?
No, I got hospitalized because I went and told a roommate. I said, hey, just make sure I'm awake in a few hours. She's like, pardon? Excuse me? What? So she and a couple friends got me to the hospital. I stayed in the hospital for a couple days.
Was that just a kind of threatening remark because you took aspirin?
It was definitely because it was aspirin. I did not want to die. At that point, this was not a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
It was, I need sleep to be able to get through these finals. A completely ill brain of thinking 8 ibuprofen is the way to answer that. So I don't know if it was, hey, I just realized I did something really dumb and I should probably tell somebody. That's probably what it was. I should probably tell somebody under the guise of, hey, I'm taking a nap, but just so you know, just side note, I just took 8 aspirin. An unconscious, desperate attempt to not have my finals, to not take them.
So you were hospitalized?
For a couple days on campus.
Did they do anything? It was like a suicide notice watch kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
My mom heard later, I don't know who told her, a doctor or something, they're like, if she wasn't a student at this school, because Vanderbilt has a hospital on campus, it's their medical center. If she wasn't a student, she might not have been hospitalized. But because she's a student, I mean, Vanderbilt is a phenomenal school. They were so supportive. And so I got extensions on my final exams, and I ended up completing them. Didn't do well, but I completed them. And I got to do that at home. So I ended up going home. My mom came out and we went home together, and then I took the next semester off.
Were you in therapy at all at this point? So
I had gone to a therapist. That moment when I heard the suicidal thought in my head, I think I signed up at the counseling center, the student counseling center. And I remember that not being very effective. But then when I started self-injuring, maybe within a week or two, my parents and friends arranged to go see this really great therapist. But it was too late at that point. I think I had gotten maybe 2-3 sessions in, at my breaking point. So then when I went home back to Colorado, we got me into therapy. I was going 2 times a week. Phenomenal therapist. And yeah, so that was really, really pivotal time in my life. A couple months later, I was doing better somewhat, but getting the therapy. And then there was a social, I don't know if it's interaction, but basically my anxiety skyrocketed because I wasn't there with my friends and I was perceiving rejection and they were mad at me and all this. And I ended up taking maybe around 8 or 10 Xanax. And the thought was, maybe I should die. So I'm going to take these and see what happens. But I remember saying to God, okay, God, I guess if I wake up tomorrow, I guess I'm going to give it my all. I remember thinking that. But when I look at it too, I'm like, 8 Xanax? Like, it seriously still wasn't it was not a severe attempt. So just very ambivalent, like, it's just showing my ambivalence with it. And from that point, because my therapist was like, don't you ever do this. It will fire you as a client, and I really, really was getting a lot out of him and really respecting him. And from that point, I took my healing extremely seriously. And took complete advantage of, I have got to figure this out. I do not want to be living like this anymore. And I don't want to die. And I don't want to do that to my other family members and friends.
Were you hospitalized for that as well?
No. Well, I went to the emergency room, but I wasn't hospitalized overnight. They gave me charcoal. Both times they gave me charcoal. Do you know what that is?
I don't. I mean, I know
it's
what
a cup of charcoal.
It's literally
like
charcoal.
It's in this disgusting liquid form, and it's to empty your stomach. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Because it tastes like charcoal.
Right. Does it clear it out because you vomited, or is it
I don't remember.
Filters it or something?
Maybe both. Yeah. I don't remember. But I remember too, my grandparents, they lived near me at the time, and seeing their faces of how devastated they were at the hospital. They came to see me, and it's like, okay, I gotta figure out how to heal and live, because this is not something I can keep doing, and I don't want to.
Yeah.
You know.
At this point, did you understand trauma or?
No, because it's still, I mean, even in school, going back the next year, the only time I read trauma as I'm studying all the counseling classes as an undergrad is in veterans. What I was noticing, I guess it was before I hit my major crash, I did have a light bulb moment of my own depression and anxiety when I was studying in it. I remember it being in a child and adolescent development class. And I'm reading this, and I was like, reading the symptoms, and I'm like, check, yep, got that. But it was like, no, I can push through this. I knew back then, that my diagnosis was depression and anxiety, and it didn't come till a few years later when I got hired in San Diego. I moved to San Diego after college at a very, I mean, they are so ahead of the curve on trauma that it was like, oh my God, that's what was happening. But everybody else, I got labeled as having borderline personality, bipolar, and it was like, this was my trauma by witnessing two men that I really cared about die by suicide. And how does one comprehend, I think just even the manner of death, comprehend somebody doing that to themselves. That my symptoms were, while I also had the self-esteem stuff and whatnot and the abandonment stuff, my symptoms just blew up because of the trauma, the untreated trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that takes you up to, I went back to school. I graduated on time. I lost friends.
Why?
What I know from what my mom told me, from what one of them told her, is that they all went to a therapist, and the therapist said they needed to cut off all contact with me.
Some therapist. Yeah.
Yeah, I disagree with that method, but I also don't know actually what happened. That's just through the grapevine story. But when I look back at it, I would not be surprised if that therapist labeled me as borderline, having borderline personality, because on the outside, it looked like I was completely erratic. I was erratic. So it looked like I had a personality condition.
Yeah.
But it was my hypervigilance that could not control what was happening inside my body. I had some other friends. I kind of switched groups, but I definitely powered through my senior year of like, my goal was to graduate from this school. And so I am doing that for myself. I am going back for me. And I got to figure out how then the loss of my friends, I've got to figure out how to navigate that. One of them, I am now still in contact. The other three of those four friends, I haven't spoken to since we graduated. One of them I did see a little bit, but I also learned, though, that I've got to be accountable for my actions. I mean, yeah, they were advised to cut off, but I wasn't a good friend.
Were you violent or?
I wasn't violent, but I was manipulative, and I think of manipulation as trying to get a need met. It's a strategic way to get a need met. I know it came from my mental health, but incessantly calling when I was, on the, I think that's what precipitated. I was incessantly calling the dorm room, and because my anxiety was like, tell me, give me affirmation that we're still okay. But it was too much for 20-year-olds to handle.
Yeah.
I would, and so I really understand that compassionately too. They weren't equipped. I wasn't equipped. But this person like just absolutely skyrocketed in anxiety and you're mad at me. And because I very much, like, you're mad at me. You don't love me, because I thought nobody loved me because I thought I wasn't worth loving. I'm pretty sure I said something along the lines of, to one of them, I had self-injured that day, and I'm pretty sure I blamed it on her. If you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have done that, and that's not fair.
How were you self-injuring?
I was using razor blades on my arm.
That's the sort of stereotypical vision in my mind. I don't know if that's the most common thing when people talk about self-injury.
Yeah, I think it's what I had access to. It started with, it was so weird. I remember laying there and at Vanderbilt, at the time you were required to live in the dorms all 4 years. So I was in my dorm room and had the bulletin board hanging on my wall next to my bed. And I remember seeing the push pins and I was like, that looks like that would be so relieving to use. Because what it is it's a displacement of physical pain versus emotional pain.
Yeah.
The physical pain felt more in control. I'm in control of this versus this emotional crap that was happening inside my body, that I couldn't figure out how to fix. So I stopped the self-injury for the most part. Self-injury is one of those that's really, really hard to stop for years. I had done some light self-injury, very superficial self-injury after I had gotten the therapy when I went home. Because there's an actual chemical release that happens. They've done research that it's similar to an addiction, I don't know if it's a dopamine release or not. But it took a few years to really, really get that out of my system. I still get sensations to self-injure if I am activated enough, but I have a whole bucket of tools that is like, okay, we're not doing that. And I actually don't want to, and that is going to hurt. So there's also something that happens with self-injury is it's not painful. There is some kind of dissociation in that process that it's not painful. Listeners, please don't take that as advice to go do it. It is an indication that you are dissociating and need help, But yeah, I mean, those behaviors, it was too much for they were responsible for me too, because I'm living in a state, thousands of miles away with a whole bunch of young adults trying to make sense of life. It was too much for them.
Right.
So, yeah. Okay. You ready for the next part?
Sure.
Okay. How old was I? 21. Spent the next 19 years healing. Working on myself. I absolutely believe in working on myself, that I'm the only one that can be responsible for myself. So even though that was painful, for example, to lose those friends in college, I played a huge role in that. And I got to figure out how to not push my friends away. Because that's not actually what I'm wanting. I wanted connection, and that doesn't help to push friends away and be a toxic friend, you know? So, and then develop my career, have had a really, good, successful career, becoming a therapist. And I firmly believe that we need to do our own work as healers. We don't have to have it all figured out. And we can still be human, but at least do enough of the work that it's not going to get in the way of somebody else, the one that we're helping. And so then my husband and I got pregnant in 2019. And at the 11th week ultrasound, we were given the news that the baby was not going to survive. He had a fluid in his nucleal fold that basically you just know you're not supposed to have it. Like if it's in utero in the baby, nucleal fold's right here. I don't know if you know that. It's like right here in the back of the neck. And it's generally an indication the baby's not going to survive. So we were told that day, you're going to need to consider a medical procedure. He might miscarry or something. But he didn't. He kept growing. And so my husband and I decided we're going to see what nature does. And he kept growing and growing. And we were able to get DNA testing and in utero testing on his heart and stuff. I think we finally got the answer around week 19 in utero. They had what's called Noonan syndrome. And it's a genetic malformation or something, like one of his chromosomes. I don't even remember. I will say that some of the details are fuzzy. My short-term memory has been really bad since I was pregnant, but my ability to recall is not the same. And I don't know if it's the trauma or if I ever got maybe COVID, long COVID or something. I have no idea. But we learned he had Noonan's syndrome. He still had fluid buildup, and on the echocardiogram, so doing the heart scans, they could see that one of his chambers was bigger than the other. So this is about the fall, winter of 2019. So we found out 11th week about the nucleal fold liquid. About week 18 or 19, we found out about the actual diagnosis that was causing it, the Noonan syndrome. From there, he's still growing, and everything else is looking good. His heart's looking off, and that's one of the big things with Noonan syndrome is that they have heart defects. But Noonan syndrome is very interesting so physically the stature is going to be a smaller, I just lost the word. Oh, developmental behind. So like some of the babies that I've seen, that when you should be walking maybe around 10 months or a year, a child with Noonan syndrome might not walk till another year later or something, so some of those developmental things. And then they can have problems with their heart. They can have a slew of problems, or you can not even know you have it. It was, let's pray he makes it to life, and let's pray this doesn't turn out too bad. But the statistics were very low that he'd even survive it to birth. But he did. And he was born in 2020, February 7th. But he had the worst of the worst. And he lived in the hospital the whole time. He made it to 98 days. The major problem he had is his lymphatic system didn't work. And the lymphatic system is the pathways of, again, science is not my forte, so those meetings with the doctors were over my head half the time, but the lymphatic system is basically the pathways for fluid to move throughout your body. And we need the fluid to move. We need the blood to pump out of the heart and go through the body and then come back and go back through again. And he basically had a bunch of dead ends. But you cannot see the lymphatic system. There is not an x-ray to see the lymphatic system. You see it by getting swollen. And this is pretty common with a lot of Noonan babies. And then when there's an infection, a lot harder to fight it off because the body's not flowing the stuff through well, and then it affects the kidneys and the liver, and he had some up and down moments. But ultimately, he got really swollen, really, really swollen, and he got a blood clot to where there was a blood clot in the arm to where a bubble was coming out of his arm because the fluid didn't have anywhere to go. And it was this question of what medically can be done that he can even survive. So they considered, do we operate on this blood clot? What do we do? Do we patch up his skin? But everything you do in the hospital is increased risk of infection. Every baby that's even in the NICU, they're at risk of infection because of having all the tubes in their bodies. I don't remember what the autopsy says, but he passed away on May 14th, and he passed away because we took him off his machines. It was clear that day, and something that people are very familiar with me saying is he was at Dell Children's the last 2 months or so of his life in the cardiac unit, and they were amazing. And they fought for him so hard, and they were coordinating with the hospital in Pennsylvania, the Children's Hospital there. I mean, they were doing everything they could, even though the odds were not looking good. So they gave it their all, and one of the doctors, he did not want to call it too soon. He didn't want to advise us to call it too soon. They were very supportive of really trusting we were going to know when or if we needed to make the decision. And his last day, it was clear that, he gave it such a good fight. He was such a fighter. There's a point when you're a parent or a loved one, it doesn't need to be a parent, when you have to say, at what cost. And his body gave us the wisdom, that it's time for him to go.
Yeah.
But something so interesting happened, and this is where I tell part of my story and where my book came out of. Something was so interesting. That day I knew I was going to be okay. I knew it. I knew in my body I was going to be okay. And when you lose a child, you hear 8 million times from other people, oh, that's the worst loss you could have. And it is really bad. My other losses were pretty bad too, you know. And maybe it is the worst loss. I don't know. But I knew I was going to be okay. And I was like, what? Who is this Amanda? Like, who is this that has a firm faith that saying goodbye to her only biological child is going to be okay? And so I got really curious about that. And figured out, because of all the work I did to learn to love myself and trust myself. And trust in the universe. I believe in a bigger plan. I believe in something that I don't know. My husband believes in it too, something that is so beautiful that I am so incredibly grateful for, is my husband and I have been very much best friends on this grief journey. And we've gone in the same direction. And I know not all couples do that, you know, and there's no judgment there. I mean, it's just so many factors at play.
Yeah.
But we're very blessed that we've been going on the same journey together, and we have both grown spiritually incredibly. My husband is now, he's switching careers because this taught him he wants to help people, wants to go into being a health practitioner. But yeah, looking at how did I get here? How did I go from being in such despair to attempting my life to like, okay, I still got this. And it's because I learned to love myself, to find my purpose, to find, you know, trust in myself that I can get through hard things. That I can learn to live with my son as an angel versus on earth, you know. And that I can trust in the bigger picture, that something good's going to come out of this. I don't know what it is, and I don't agree with the route. This does not mean I agree with losing my child.
Yeah.
Yet what can I do to keep making the best out of life? What can I do to be there with helping people who are in pain? What can I do to keep taking care of myself? Because I've got to stay on top of it. I'm not in the clear, you know. It's not like I just get to say, oh, I don't have to watch my mental health anymore or whatever. But what can I do each day to take care of myself and make sure I'm really doing what's best for my energy, for my time? Yeah. And so here we are, and we're approaching his 4th birthday next week. The other thing I did too is I knew how to do grief very differently. I didn't power through achievement. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why my husband and I have done so well together is the moment grief comes up, we stop everything. And we just sit there and honor it. We don't ask, you know, we ask, hey, you know, is there anything you want to talk about? Is there anything? But it's not like, oh God, what do you need? You know, it's like, hey, here it is. Let's be with it.
Do you all experience it at different times or at the same time?
We do. It's very interesting. We experience it at completely opposite times. It is this weird intrinsic thing that happens. I'll have like a bad day. It'll happen around wherever, and he's like, fine. And then a couple days later, he's like, oh my God, I broke down today, you know, or it'll be flip-flopped. It is the weirdest thing. It is so rare that it's the same day. But I don't know if it's unconscious or what, or if we're lucky. I have no idea. But what we committed to was we were not going to apologize about our grief. We were not going to apologize about crying, because that's what I did before. I hid it. I justified it. I felt bad that I had grief. I've got to get this under control. I'd apologize to people for crying. And there are a lot of societal messages that reinforce that. Just watch TV, watch reality TV for 3 hours, and you'll see how many times people say, oh, don't cry.
Right.
You know, So I knew to do it differently this time. And I knew that the best way I could get through grief is to go towards it rather than away from it. And it moves through faster. It moves through faster, and not that we need it to speed up, but it has helped us get to the other side of it, of the joy and the gratitude. Who knows? Maybe he was the only biological child I was able to have. You know? Who knows? So I'm so grateful that I got to experience creating a little human in his mind. And now I have a little angel. So, yeah.
I feel strange asking this question, even though you have answered it in a certain way. But I always ask my guests about, since the show is called Friends with Deficits, what are the benefits of what you've experienced?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. I have given it some thought. I remember when I first heard your podcast, and when I look back at, for example, with my dad, it was a rough road, that depression, but I do think that the combination of losing him to suicide and then me getting to that brink and testing fate, and then that switch when I said, I am going to conquer this. One ended up being probably my greatest gift of being a therapist, as I understand the depths of humanity. And so it's not just I read it out of a book that here's what happens with depression. It's like, oh, no, I get it. Or a panic attack. I don't know if you've experienced anxiety, but if you know, you know. It's, if you have anxiety, you know, and it shuts down your body. And so I've been to the depths of it, but then I've also seen what works. And I've seen, so that's where my book is. My book's called Embody Your Worth. And so when I thought about how did I get here after Ashton had passed and how am I okay, I sat down, I mapped it out. I was like, what were the biggest tools I learned along the way? And that's exactly what my book is the biggest tools that I learned to deal with hard stuff and to take care of myself. And I wouldn't have that knowledge if I hadn't had those experiences. Again, that doesn't mean that's the route I would prefer. I just do this, see the benefit and the silver lining or gold lining of what came out of it. And then with my son, it has taken me into this spiritual realm. I'm very, like I talked about with college, very academic, intellectual. It has taken me in this realm that there's not enough science and books to read about this that's going to make sense. Scientifically, we knew he had a genetic condition, but why this happened to him, why this happened to my child, I will never get an answer for. And so surrendering into trusting this bigger plan, I would have never predicted that I would be closer spiritually from the loss of my son. But I get signs from him all the time. So does my husband. We've met with mediums and it's like, holy schmoly, how did they know that? And how did, so, I don't want to prescribe necessarily what the spiritual route is, but in my world, there is something else. And if there's not really something else, it's not hurting me to believe it. But it gives me this faith that like I enter each day differently now where it's like, okay, I got this. Okay. Sit back, surrender to it. I trust that I'm going to be able to handle this. And timing is, it's not the timing I choose because I'm not very patient, but timing is on my side and things have worked out. And what a gift to be able to experience that spirituality and then recognize, I think maybe reaching a limit as a therapist, that intellectual stuff. I'm very curious and excited to see how that enters into me being a healer. And I don't know if that looks like through therapy. My husband and I have talked about running retreats, don't know what it is, but I'm really excited for this new not staying in my mind thing and going more into trusting the universe and the the nature and, all the cosmic stuff.
Yeah.
That is not necessarily my strength, but learning how to embrace that.
Cool. Are you religious at all?
Yeah, I mean, I identify as Christian.
Were you raised in a religious household?
I was raised Christian, but we didn't go to church. I went to church on my own. I was desperately seeking understanding God when all that happened with my dad, really desperately seeking it. Now, I believe in Jesus. I believe in and he's always been a guide for me as to how to live my life. Lead with love. No judgment. But there's some other things around Christianity that I don't agree with. Somebody referred to me, though, it as churchianity. It's hard to tell the difference between Christianity and churchianity, something that, like, the church propagates. Is that the right word?
Churchianity. That's good.
Where it's like, really, we're going to condemn you because we're being judgmental. But that's not actually what the Bible's saying, so I don't know. The Bible's way over my head anyway, and I don't get caught in the weeds in it. But what I do love is the modeling that I've learned to lead with love.
Yeah.
And it's been my motto my whole life, but not to the detriment anymore of loving so much that I abandon myself. So definitely I feel inclined, but my dad also always says there's many ways to the top of the mountain. And I believe that too. I do not believe that God is condemning somebody who's never even heard of Christianity. Like, I can't wrap my head around that. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
That the only way that people are going to get to this heaven is because they believed in Christianity, except for that 5-year-old that lived over in some other country and didn't even know Christianity and Jesus existed. Like, that doesn't make sense. It's an all-loving God to me.
Yeah.
That's where I stand with that.
Good.
Yeah. I just feel so much gratitude. And I would not have predicted that, if somebody had said 6 years ago, you're going to birth a child and then you're going to lose your child and you're going to feel so grateful and love life, I'd be like, you're insane. Like, that, who does that happen to? And it's not that, it doesn't mean I don't have bad days. It doesn't mean that I don't have my questions or doubts. I was going to say I very much trust. No, I still don't trust everything. Yeah, I like to have control over things, but I'm learning to trust more. But I do trust in the bigger picture.
You can trust that you don't have control over things.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. That was a joke I was using throughout my entire pregnancy. I was telling my mom, I was like, this is a really cruel way for God to test my ability to let go of control. It was, but I really surrendered into the process, did a lot of meditating, and then, yeah, I could not have, there was nothing I could control about what happened with Ashton.
Yeah, this sounds like a cruel test, and I'm not trying to position it as that, but it does seem like, yeah, just it takes something that big for you to realize what you were saying, that kind of sense of self-love and being able to let go of things. And
we joke that what is my dad? I feel like I hear him saying, when I meet the big boss, I'm going to have some choice words with him, and my husband and I joke about that. Like, we're going to sit down and go, was this really the best route? Like, is that the way you needed to teach me the lesson?
Yeah.
But I do find a lot of humor in it, because it was pure as day. I'd be laying on the couch going, all I can do right now is just sit here and breathe for my child.
Yeah.
That's all I can do, and be present. And it's a valuable lesson. Mm-hmm. But we don't have to like our lessons. But I do choose to grow from them.
Yeah. I think personally life is it's just that strange route that you didn't ask for. And just navigating it is what our purpose is.
It is. And I wish somebody told me that. I thought that we were going to get to some age and things were just going to just be hunky-dory and smooth as butter. And it's like, oh, I told somebody that recently. I can't remember. They're 20-something. I don't remember what brought it up, but I was like, hey, let me go ahead and prepare you. So life is going to be full of lessons. They're never stopping.
Yep.
Have fun. Mm-hmm. Like, yay. Have fun. Enjoy that little piece of tidbit.
Who did you tell this to? Was it a client or was it like a arch nemesis?
I'm trying to remember. See, this is my short-term memory. I don't think it was a client. I feel like I know who it was. Yes. Okay. I figured it out. It was somebody, it was a friend of a friend that I met recently, and they're in their early 20s. And I'm like, I'm not trying to make this, super negative, but just go ahead and embrace that life is just all about lessons, and they're not going to stop, and you're not going to like all of them.
Yeah. It's nice to term it lessons as opposed to like, disasters, challenges, or whatever. Yeah. And you always have something to learn, I suppose. Cool.
If you choose to.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you choose to. And
I think that's what makes it a lesson. Otherwise, it's
that's true. That's true.
Bad news.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Yeah.
So it was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I love you normalizing these stories, because they're happening.
Yeah.
These life events are happening, and we just don't. I love that you're moving culture forward to create space to have, to talk about these things. Yeah, I think that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right. Well, all right. I'd like to thank my guest again, Amanda Wallingsford. You can learn more about her and her services at positivechangescounseling.net and alignandembody.net. I'll have links to these and other information in our show notes, which you can read at friendswithdeficitspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please continue listening, subscribe to our newsletter, and tell your friends about the show. And if you'd like to support us, visit patreon.com/friendswithdeficits. There you can also hear outtakes, get info on some of my other shenanigans, and help keep Friends with Deficits going strong. That's patreon.com/friendswithdeficits. Once again, I'm Adam Sultan. Enjoy your lessons.